Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And welcome to the second half of the fourth annual Staff Institute, the afternoon session. We're really happy to have you here today, and we have a really good presentation ready for you. Before we get started and introduce our keynote speaker, I just wanted to acknowledge a few folks who have helped us out. Thank you very much, IT, from my staff, Mrs. Vanessa Branch-Nance, and also I just wanted to recognize Dr. Don Terry Veal, our Chief of Staff, who is also one of the organizers of the Staff Institute. A couple of things. After our speaker does present, we will have time for question and answers. So I just wanted to let you know about that. Also, after the presentation and after we do have question and answers, we will have some time for door prizes. So make sure everyone gets a ticket. We have some really nice prizes for you. And if you haven't gotten a ticket, where is Miss Branch-Nance? There she is. She's up there giving the ticket. So just raise your hand and she'll go ahead and give one to you. After the session is over, we do have a shuttle bus for you, so you don't have to walk in the heat. It will be out in the front of the building at 3:30. Okay, and I think he might, or the shuttle driver might do a couple of stops. So if you missed the first one, then you might be able to get the second one. And then our session after this starts at 3:50. It's back in the ballroom at the Student Center, and that will be a session on mental health training. The university has a program where they will train individuals, faculty, and staff on working in mental health. I will say unofficially, you're not going to get a certificate to be an official therapist, but Dr. Banks will be explaining that to you. Did I say that correctly, Dr. Banks? Okay, it's all right. Okay, and then at the end of the day, 5 o'clock, when you usually go home, we're going to have a reception here, and so that should be really nice, and that will be inside the Student Union, so it would be nice and Tyler Hall. I'm sorry, forget that I said the Student Union. Tyler Hall, so that should be really very nice. Okay, let's see, I think I covered everything. Without further ado, I'm just going to turn the mic over to Dr. Wilson, who's going to introduce our guest speaker.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Please join me in thanking Dr. Linda Mellinger and the team that she worked with putting on the Staff Institute. You know, we started this about 4 years ago, and the desire was to bring someone to the campus during the Faculty Staff Institute who actually would speak with staff about clinical issues as well. That's what we heard from you, and that's what we have been trying to do. And today we have an amazing leader, just an unbelievable talent. And I am just so excited to welcome the 10th president of Spelman College to the National Treasure, Morgan State University. Dr. Schmidt Campbell actually became president of Spelman in 2015, and so she just concluded her 7th year. And as you heard me say this morning, you know, there are some people who can say, I've been at a place for 30 years. And you look back on those 30 years, and what you really see is that they have not been 30 transformational years. It's been like 1 year of experience 30 times. But when you look back on Dr. Campbell's 7 years, oh, well, you can multiply that by 4 times, right? It's like a 28-year tenure, because year 2 was not like year 1, year 3 was not like year 1 and 2. It was a continual building block. But let me just say a word or two about her background. I won't be long, because she's an amazing person in the arts and has a stellar resume. She earned her undergraduate degree from Swarthmore, and then she ended up teaching out of the country, actually, in Kumbi International College of Zambia. And then she returned to the U.S. To study for her advanced degree. and she did that in art history at Syracuse and received her master's there. And then she became a curator of the Everson Museum of Fine Arts in Syracuse, and also the art editor of the Syracuse New Times. And then she went on to serve as executive director of the Studio Museum in Harlem. For many of you who understand Black culture, there are two incredible institutions in the United States that you always need to have on your radar. And of course, it's the Studio Museum in Harlem and the Schomburg. And so Dr. Campbell has familiarity with all of them. And then she went back and she earned a PhD from Syracuse, and then served as Commissioner of Cultural Affairs for the city of New York. In essence, she managed all of the cultural institutions and organizations in New York City. And then she established herself as a leader in the field of the arts and public policy, and as such, then she became the dean of the New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, which of course has produced so many fill-in-the-blank film directors, Broadway producers, actors, writers, if you will. They have come through those doors. And so she is nationally renowned in the area of arts policy and American cultural history. She has won so many national awards, and she's inducted into so many academies. As a matter of fact, I just joined her in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, but Dr. Campbell has, of course, been there for years, and I'm just a newcomer. She is actually married to physicist Dr. George Campbell. Many of you may have heard of him. He's the retired president of NACME, the National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering. And they have 3 adult sons, one of whom I just saw 2 weeks ago at Harvard, who was the former provost at Morehouse. And so please join me in giving just an incredible, more enthusiastic welcome to Dr. Mary Smith.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How's everybody doing this afternoon? That was a great morning. What a way to kick off. Yes, what a way to kick off this semester, the academic year. I was so inspired listening to Dr. Wilson's presentation. I almost felt like I wanted to be part of Morgan State, and that's really. I mean, that's the whole rationale for doing these kinds of events, to remind ourselves of why we're here and what our values are. And I just have to start by saying that for the past 12 years, I have really admired the leadership of your president. He has set very clear institutional goals, and then he's directed the institution to meet them, by going from R3 to R2, and now the aspiration to go from R2 to R1 in a very deliberate, focused way. I've been impressed by these rising graduation rates and retention rates, by the physical development of the campus. These buildings are magnificent. This building is magnificent. And the relationship that's been established between Morgan State and the community. It's very easy for colleges and universities to kind of build a moat around themselves and kind of look inward, but there is so much that we can do in terms of using our resources, our intellectual, our educational resources, to really energize the communities in which we have the privilege to serve. So congratulations, Dr. Wilson. I know also that all of these accomplishments certainly come about through exemplary leadership. And they also come about, as Dr. Wilson pointed out this morning, because of you. Every single person in this room who has dedicated his or her hard work and determination, and I would say also faith, has been part of whatever Morgan State University has accomplished. And it doesn't happen by accident. We don't all just kind of get together and say, okay, we're just going to have a college. We have to be very deliberate and very focused. And one of the ways that we do that, one of the ways that we manifest excellence, is through service. And this afternoon, President Wilson invited me to speak specifically about service, and I saw that the published title of my talk is Creating and Maintaining Excellence in Customer Service. And that's a good title, but I want to offer up a different title for this afternoon. And that is, Our Service is Our Power. Okay? Our service is our power. And this afternoon I'm going to kind of walk through how we enable that power. But first I have to be very candid and tell you where I got that title. I got that title from a billboard that was outside Bozeman, Montana. Now you're wondering, what in the world was I doing in Bozeman, Montana? Well, I live in Big Sky, Montana. My husband and I, after retirement, moved to Montana. That's a whole other story. And so I'm riding it's 40 miles from Big Sky to Bozeman where the airport is. And so I'm riding you go through the mountains. You don't see anything except mountains. So you go through the mountains for about 40 miles. You get to the city limits, there's this huge billboard that says, Our service is our power. Now, never mind that it was for a plumbing repair service. That's not important. But it did strike me because it spoke to the agency that each and every one of us has and the potency of that agency. So lest you think that a plumbing billboard is the sole source of inspiration for the talk today, let me quickly assure you that I have some other lessons to share about what I have learned about why service is so powerful. So the first part of my talk, I'm going to talk about 10 critical lessons that I've learned. You heard Dr. Wilson, we sort of recite the details of my very checkered career. But I've worked in everything from a mid-sized museum to New York City government, which is probably the most complicated Byzantine bureaucracy in the country, to a large private Research One university, to a small liberal arts single-sex college. And these lessons are true across all of those institutions, every single one of them. These are truths which are absolutely fundamental to the offering excellence in service, no matter what kind of institution you serve. Then, what I'd like to do is to talk more specifically about Spelman College. Because Spelman takes service very, very seriously. And I'll tell you my experience when I went there and the understanding of what a priority there was and the barriers that the institution placed on good service, as well as the barriers that people themselves placed in front of good service. And I'm going to end then with a set of principles that I developed when I was at NYU, and I've held to these principles for about 20 years, and they are the principles that I ask everybody who works with me, everybody who's on my team, to abide by. And they're principles for how we are going to work with each other, respect each other, what's going to guide our relationship, and I have asked my senior team members to then communicate that to their managers and to their teams with whom they work. Because at the core of good service is a sense of how we want to treat each other and treat the people we serve. Okay. So, before I get started on telling you about these three different parts, let me ask you a few questions. Number one, how many people here believe in the mission of Morgan State University? Okay. How many people here embrace the strategic plan that President Wilson put forth today, this morning? Okay. And lastly, there's a lot of talk in that plan about student success and student well-being. How many people here want to see every single student who comes here succeed? Okay. So I knew what the answer to the questions were going to be, right? Because this is a community of common purpose, of shared purpose. That's why you're here. That's why you put your energy and effort into this place day by day, month by month, semester by semester, year by year. One of my wonderful staff members at Spelman used to say there is a dailiness about our work. We don't just, it's not an event. We don't do it once and then go away. There is a dailiness to what we do. And so we're talking about service because when we talk about service, we're talking about how we affirm those students who are here, whom we want to see succeed. When we talk about service, we're talking about how we support the faculty who have those either 4-4 loads or 3-3 loads. We know all about that at Spelman. And the 40 advisees. Service says, I support you, I see you. It's the way we support each other, right? How we communicate with each other and how we talk. All of that says we're all in this together. We all have this common purpose and we're coming here every day to fulfill it. And the service is how we express that openly and visibly to each other and frankly to the world. So let me start with my first lesson in service, which was the Studio Museum in Harlem. I came to the museum in 1977. I know some of you weren't born then. But the museum, I put it in quotes, was a loft over a liquor store and a Kentucky Fried Chicken. We had a difficult time meeting payroll every 2 weeks. We had a difficult time paying rent. There was no air conditioning in the summer, no heat in the winter. And we billed ourselves, the Board of Trustees, when they appointed me, said, we are the premier center in support of Black artists. Our mission, that's our mission. And we fulfill that mission by mounting exhibitions, publishing catalogs of their works for that exhibition, supporting resident artists, and doing education programs. Now, there were a lot of things that were messed up at the Studio Museum in Harlem, but never once did the museum ever stop serving its artists. It always mounted the exhibits on time, published on time, supported the artists, and did the programs in the schools. And so the first lesson of service is to know, whom do I serve? Whom do I serve? Because you can do a lot of other things really well. But if you're not serving those who are core to your mission, you really can't have good service. That's number one. Lesson number two, very quickly I learned, lesson number one is necessary, but it's not sufficient. It is fine, and when I first came there, in the first 2 years, I will tell you, I was a disaster as a director. As I said, I was able to I've been a curator, I knew all about the arts, I could get those shows up, I could get those catalogs published, but the fundraising, the paying the rent, all of those things, those were things I didn't know, and I realized I had to study and learn. And so that's lesson number two. In order to serve that fundamental core mission, you have to know and study and learn the fundamentals of organizational management and administration and leadership, and you can study those, you can learn those. You can go to school, you can read books, you can go to conferences, you can go, there are many, many different ways, but you have to learn them. We don't wake up one morning and say, and we're all managers or administrators. We don't. And if we're not studying it at some point in our lives and our careers, we are missing an opportunity to be as good as we can be. The third lesson that I learned, and this is connected to the first two, is that there has to be a level of organizational fiscal health and sustainability. I love the fact that when President Wilson is presenting pride points on Morgan State, he very often will reference the good financial standing of the university. That, yeah, there you go, all right. That is key. I mean, you can, you can be a brilliant writer, curator, whatever, if they're getting ready to close the doors because you can't pay the rent. What's the point? And so so those were three of my early lessons coming into my professional life. And I learned those at the Studio Museum, and I learned them well. I studied what it meant to have fund accounting, to read financials. You have to know that. You have to know what they're saying to you about your organization and where the weaknesses are, where the strengths are, and how you can capitalize on both. I left this small Black Fine Arts Museum, which had moved from the loft to its own permanent building on 125th Street. AJ is familiar with that space, and went to city government, to this huge gargantuan place that serves 8 million New Yorkers. We had hundreds of cultural institutions that had to be served, and you had to serve the mayor of New York City. And the thing that I learned in city government is, if you're talking about good service, you have to set clear expectations. My first boss was Mayor Edward I. Koch. My second one was David Dinkins. That first boss said to the commissioners, every phone call you get has to be answered within 24 hours. Now, this is city government. Now, you don't have to answer it personally, but you have to make sure somebody on your staff is answering that call in 24 hours. Every piece of correspondence has to be answered within 72 hours, 48 to 72 hours. Now, this is before email, so we had a little bit of a break. This was 1987. There wasn't, the deluge of emails that we all get. But still, we're talking about city government. There was a stack of mail that was waiting for you every single day. And finally, then this was the kicker. If somebody brought a problem to you, either by phone or through that mail, even if you were not the person who was going to solve that problem, you had to make sure that you put the complainer in touch with someone who could actually solve the problem. Not just hot potato, well, we don't do it here, why don't you try it here? You had to make sure that someone else was going to solve that problem. I never forgot that. For 4 years, that's how we worked in New York City government. And it said to me, and that's what so lesson number 4, the institution has to set clear expectations. If you say good customer service, what does that mean? Lesson number 5, be responsive. Respond, respond, respond. I'll never forget when I first went over to NYU from city government and somebody got something, they said, I'm not going to bother to answer it. I said, what? That would get you fired in New York City government, deciding not to respond. And I believe that's wrong. If somebody takes the time to ask you a question, even if you think it is the silliest, nonsensical question you could ever. They deserve a response, and they deserve a response this time. And lesson number 6, if there is a problem that has to be solved, here's what I really learned from city government. Determine what problem it is you're trying to solve. And that's a tricky one. People will write, and particularly when they're emotional, right? They'll write something and they've got all of their emotions in it, and you're trying to figure, what's the problem? You know, and just even being able to articulate that back to somebody is very often helpful to the person who came to you in the first place. So, and that's something I have found for the rest of my career. If you respond to somebody quickly, sometimes they're so surprised. At Spelman, the students used to laugh and say, if you email President Campbell, you better be ready because she's going to get back to you like in 5 minutes. That was the trick. If you got back to people quickly, it almost is disarming. And it already you have lowered whatever emotional anxiety they have come forward with. So those were very powerful, I have to say, very powerful lessons for me. And I get to New York University as Dean of the Tisch School of Arts, and I'm thinking, whoa, you know, this is the #1 film school in the country. We had a total of 4,000 students in the school. Now this was a conservatory. So this meant that we not only had classrooms like this, but you had dance studios and dark rooms and theaters, and students had to make films. That's how they learned how to make films. So there was a lot of operational complexity, right, in the school. So I'm there like, I don't know, a week. And a student comes to my office and he complains. He says, I'm taking a film course. The instructor says, you need the camera, you need the lens, you need the tripod, you need the light meter. He said, I go down to get all this equipment so I can do my assignment. I get to the equipment room, there's nothing there. He said, none of the things that I need for my assignment are there. I said, well, how can that? I go down into the equipment room, which was at the time in the basement of the school. It's in complete and utter disarray. Now, whom do we serve? We serve the students. We serve the curriculum of the college. And the equipment that they need is in complete state of disorder. So, I'm not a filmmaker, I'm an art historian. What do I know? I go and I ask the head of the department, how does this process work? He doesn't know. I asked a couple of faculty members, how does this process work? Where, you know, when you teach a class and you assign the students how to do it. He has no idea. There's a woman who is an assistant to the registrar who went to the film school who says, I know how it's supposed to work. I invite her to my office, the head of the equipment department, the head of production. I get a big whiteboard. And this is at a time when that film with Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington was out. It was called Philadelphia. And Denzel says, tell it to me like I'm a 4-year-old. I said, tell it to me like I'm a 4-year-old. I'm a student. I'm sitting in film class. My instructor gives me an assignment, tells me what kind of equipment I need. How do you folks in the equipment department know to have all that equipment on hand for that course and for the other 200 courses we offer? And I said, we're not leaving this office until we map exactly that process. We started with the one course and over several months mapped all of the 200 courses, and of course then had to completely reorganize the equipment room to match that. Sometimes, when we talk about service, and we talk about being pleasant and being patient, that's not enough. Sometimes there are serious organizational infrastructure processes that have to be fixed first. And that was my first lesson, lesson number 7, that I learned at the Tisch School. Mapping process. And okay, so now it's mapped. The chair of the department has to have it. Every faculty member who's teaching the course has to have it. Of course, the people in the equipment room have to have it. That process prompted us to, in the course of renovations, completely get rid of that basement area, take an entire city block, and create a brand new organizational structure for our equipment room. So much so that when guests used to come to the Tisch School, the first thing people would say, "Can we show you our equipment room?" Because it took that level of rethinking and reorganization in order to serve well. And now it is truly, honestly, it's truly a thing of beauty. Lesson number 8. I'm still in my early days at the Tisch School at New York University. I think, oh, you know, this is a Research One university and they're all sophisticated. I get a call from HR. 2 staff people are engaged in a fist fight down in the basement. So, okay, fine. So, the basement again, this is not a good place. So they investigate, and what it turns out is that each staff person had exactly the same job description. And when I queried their supervisor, what I determined is that the supervisor didn't have the courage to say no to either one, and either fire one or reassign one, and just be very clear. Now, that's an extreme case, but it points to the need in terms of providing service, to have everybody has to have a clear role, their roles clearly outlined, and their responsibilities clearly outlined, and everybody who works in whatever team has to get something done should know what everybody else is doing. So in my institutional advancement, everybody should know whose role it is to draft the correspondence, or to manage the foundation requests, or to keep the database current. In admissions, everybody should know whose role it is to do the various aspects for the recruitment of prospects, and for the management of the Common App, and for the review. All of those roles and responsibilities have to be clear, not just to the person who's doing them, but to everybody who's participating on a team. Otherwise, how can we even play the game if we don't know what all the team members are doing? So that was lesson number 8. And I will tell you, the larger a university is, as I said, NYU is another huge, 50,000 students, you know, it's sprawled all over, you know, lower Manhattan and in Brooklyn, and it's got sites in Abu Dhabi and Shanghai and all of, you know. The more complicated things get, the more that kind of clarity is absolutely necessary. So, after 23 years at the Tisch School of the Arts, I retired in May of 2014. I said, I'm done. My husband and I are going to go off to Big Sky and, you know, just do our retirement thing. And then in the fall of 2015, I was at Spelman College as president. And I was just thrilled to be there. Spelman has, for 15 years, been ranked as the #1 HBCU. And people are so proud of the service that they offer, that when I was touring the offices, I'd see there were these little placards on everybody's desk that said civility, courteousness, conscientiousness. There were posters on the wall that also celebrated all of these attributes and markers of good service. And there was a real aspect to the culture that, you know, we should not only have the dailiness of service, but also what I would call the saintliness. That is, when people are being disagreeable, you're agreeable. When people are being impatient, you're patient. When people just, are just being recalcitrant, you're understanding. It's just, there was this kind of level of expectation that, you really have to bring everything to the table. And yet, there were these persistent problems in terms of service. And as we began to map our strategic plan, one of the pillars of our strategic plan became enhancing operational excellence. And in the process of determining what we needed to improve our operational excellence, we determined that there's some things the institution needed to do to support the good intentions of people who wanted to do good service. So, and I'm going to get to that when I talk a little bit more specifically about Spelman. And that's lesson number 9. Lesson number 10 is, in doing that, we have to be extremely honest with ourselves and with each other, from a personal level and an institutional level. So let me move to what we discovered at Spelman that kept getting in the way of our being able to realize those great intentions that everybody brought to work every day. The first thing we discovered is that we operated in silos. So I'll take admissions and advancement. Great departments, fabulous. Our admissions has gone from 5,000 applications to 13,000 this year. We have 500 spaces that we have to fill. Our advancement, we've raised in 5 years about $325 million. They're going great guns. Both departments are stellar. Here's an issue. Advancement gets new scholarships, brand new scholarships. Actually, this is an actual occurrence. Reed Hastings and Patty Quillen gave the college $40 million for full 10 years of 20 students with full scholarships over the next 10 years, right? How then does admissions know about, and when does admissions know about that gift so that admissions can use that as a recruiting tool? What is the communication stream between those two? How are we managing? Another example, somebody gives us a major endowment, right, for scholarships, but our finance person is very clear, you gotta let that vest for a year. And then even after a year, you're not going to spend 100% of the yield, right? I've got it right. Your finance person is shaking his head. But in the meantime, the folks over in the department don't get that message, right? They see the endowment, they calculate the income from it, and so they're planning something else. How do we create the income? How do we create the communications stream that is necessary in order for all of us to take advantage, even when all of the news is good, even when all the news, and it's never going to be always good. So that was very clear. No matter how good your division and your department is, the college, the university has to have ways in which a communication stream is always flowing among various departments. So that was one huge barrier that we felt we needed to break down at Spelman College. Speaking about processes, we had no published processes at Spelman. I had just come from a place, NYU, where we had almost a total breakdown because we had no process. But we didn't have any processes. People would go on vacation, they'd get sick, or maybe they'd leave their positions, and no one else knew what a process had to be followed, and something would stay on somebody's desk for, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks before someone located it and picked it up. My chief of staff was given the task of mapping the major processes in the college and posting them on a portal. So if I wanted to know what is the route for reimbursement of faculty travel, I could actually look that up. If I wanted to know the policy behind faculty travel, I could look that up on the same portal. That was something else we also discovered, that our policies resided in different divisions, but what good is that? If I'm in the president's office and I need to know what the travel policy is, I have to figure out who owns that policy. We collected all of the policies from all over the college and put them on one portal. So you just go in, you look it up, you want to look up travel, you look up travel. If you want to look up renting space on the campus, you can look that up. And you can find who owns it. If you have questions about the policy, there's somebody who owns that policy and you can go to it. So that ability to actually make visible your processes and your policies was something we discovered was an impediment because it hadn't been clear in the first place. Technology. I always like to say when I came to Spelman, the technology was quaint. That was a nice way of saying it was falling apart. It was antiquated. So what that meant is that a lot of the processes that we did have were being done manually, when they could have easily been done, they could have been automated. So that was number one, very quickly that we learned. Number two, and this is where it gets complicated. People may have had technologies that worked for their division, but they didn't necessarily, those technologies were not necessarily integrated. And so one technology of one division did not speak to the technology of another division. And that was contributing to this silo effect. Or, here's another barrier. They had all the technology, they had the capacity to do everything that was automated, but the folks in the division really didn't have the time to learn that technology, and so it sat there and it was never really utilized. And that became a whole area unto itself. That is, what is the technology? What is the technology architecture? How are we using it? How are we integrating it? How are we managing people to use it? Because if it's not being used, you may as well not even have it there in the first place. And there was yet another barrier that actually got worse during COVID. And that is in the effort to be saintly and to be agreeable and to be patient and all of that, sometimes the people whom we serve are so filled with emotion that we sometimes find ourselves getting caught up in that emotion. And that emotion can be anything from frustration, anxiety, rage. People can say really bad things to you and about you or about the school. And it became, what we found particularly during COVID, particularly during the pandemic, is that it became very difficult for our staff to manage their own emotions as those emotions surged towards them. And that is a barrier. That's a barrier to service. Being able to understand that the person on the other end has a problem and you're trying to solve the problem, and it's sometimes going to be wrapped up in a lot of what appear to be almost uncontrollable emotions, and it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about the way they're feeling about the way things are going. I can't get my financial aid. I paid my bill, but it's not showing up on my account. I put in this reimbursement a month ago, and I haven't gotten any money back from it. My grant should be charged for this expense. It wasn't. You name it, and things, other things are boiling. Dr. Wilson talked about the number of people among us who have had experienced loss. That becomes overlaid, and it became extremely difficult in these past 2 years for people to manage through that emotional surge, and that becomes a barrier to good service. So, in terms of thinking about how we solved many of these barriers, here's some things that we did. First and foremost, we actually completely rethought our Chief Technology Officer position. And we have somebody now who comes in with a huge depth of experience and has launched a digital revolution. I mean, a massive revolution. And he has set hallmarks for us, benchmarks for us. I always like to say we're about 50% through it. He always corrects me and says, nah, we're really about 40% through this revolution. But it meant looking at all of our systems, homogenizing them, getting training programs, creating students who could be champions of change, identifying faculty who could be helpful in adapting new technology. He had a massive program of change that would enable technology to help us have more efficient processes, to have more expeditious, simpler, more expeditious ways of doing things, to having better flows of communications among our divisions. It is massive. It's going to take probably 3 to 5 years. We're probably in the 3rd year of it. The second thing that we did, as I said, I assigned my chief of staff to actually call together key staff and do the process mapping. That was critical. And it was critical because it got people together to understand, what do you do in your, oh, that's how it works in your area. Well, this is how it works in ours. And it got a conversation going around how things work. A third thing that we did, which I love, is we established a leadership institute at Spelman. We invited all of our senior leaders to nominate one person who was a promising manager, and we had a 9-month intensive program in terms of management, organizational structure, leadership. We assigned them mentors throughout the college. Our senior leadership team became mentors to these managers, and but in the first year, I would say over half of the people who went through that program were ultimately promoted. We're doing our second cohort, and I participated in the last seminar. The questions were fantastic. They formed a cohort in and of themselves, and they discuss leadership and discuss management issues. And we intend to do this every other year, is to take, it'll be somewhere around a dozen promising middle managers and giving them this intensive training. And it has had just a spectacular impact on their morale, on their sense of themselves, on their kind of grasp of what's possible for them. And finally, as I said, you know, we have the 10, this is my last section. I really put a lot of stock in these 10 principles. And I tell people who come to work, people who come to work with me, I hand this to them. I say, look, here's what's expected of you. If there's anything on this page that gives you pause, don't come here. Really. You know? And the first thing is tell the truth now. And the reason I phrased it that way is that for me, the core of how we all work together is integrity. For us to be truthful with each other. And the reason I say tell the truth now is it's not good enough if you have really messed up and you tell me 3 weeks after the mess up, right? You gotta come early and say, you know what happened? This is what happened. And I make a point of telling people, I'm not there to cast blame. I want to know the problem. You will be in more trouble if you hide the problem than if you bring the problem to me. That's the message. Tell the truth now. The second thing that I tell everybody, be kind. We all have to have difficult conversations with people. Really difficult conversations. And we have to have them. But we don't have to be mean and angry about it. We can still put our arm around somebody and tell them, that's not working. Let's rethink that, right? So be kind. Allow, encourage dissent and difference. And I know President Wilson agrees with me. The last thing you want is a lot of people around you who are agreeing with you. If I'm in a room and everybody's agreeing with everybody, I'm saying to myself, this is not working. Something's wrong here. You want a place where people can have actual disagreements, and that's permitted. You're not punished for it. People don't get angry at the differences, but you have to have that ability to have different perspectives. That's where the good solutions come in. And therefore, the next one is keep confidences. So you have to be, if you're going to speak honestly and openly, and you're going to disagree, you can't have people walking out of a room and then saying, well, you know what he said in there. There has to be a place of, and this comes to the 5th principle, a place of trust. Trust comes from being honest with each other, of understanding that this is a place where we can have open conversation and it's not going to go outside, that we build that trust, and I can depend on that, we can depend on that. The number 6, and this is really important, it's very tempting in any group setting for people to champion themselves, right? What I tell people is, I'm looking to see you champion somebody else's success. That's what I want to hear. I love it when one of my senior team members would say, Provost, the Vice President of Student Affairs would say to the Provost, that was a great faculty institute that you put together. I really enjoy to celebrate each other's success. The 7th, in the age of cell phones, be present. If I see your head down and your thumb under the table, and I will tell you, when I was at NYU, I was the first person to get in a room and put my head down and get into the thumb thing with my cell phone. But I would tell people, if we're in the room and we are running the college, running the university together, if we are solving problems together, if you are with your team solving problems together, we can't have people who are elsewhere, that is, on their phones, on their computers, sometimes you have to step out of a meeting in order to take an urgent call, understood. But you want everybody to be present and available. 8, probably one of the most important. Own your mistakes. There is a book by Catherine Schultz called Being Wrong. I would recommend it to anybody who is an administrator or a manager or a leader. Why? There will always come a time when you are wrong, when you make a mistake. Own it. Be the first one to say, oh my gosh, I misstated. I got my facts wrong. Own them. Because what it will do is it will make, particularly if you're a leader, it will make other people comfortable with coming forward. And that's the way we learn. That's the way we figure out, oh, we thought this was going to work, but this didn't work. We have to correct this. Number 9, search for the facts. Always work. People would say, well, you know, I understand the students are, what students? How many students? Which students? Where did you get that information? How many students? And understanding bringing to bear facts and metrics makes for the best kind of decision making. And finally, my final principle is listen closely. I used to have when I was president, every year I had a president's reading circle. And I would choose a book, usually a book that I really liked. And I would, students could apply to be part of the reading circle. The first year we read the biography of Alexander Hamilton. And then of course I was able to get some group tickets very early on, before the show became popular. I got about 40 group tickets at a discount, right? And so by the time we finally went to Hamilton, which was in January, I could have paid all their tuitions if I had sold the tickets. But every year I would choose, one year we chose The Color Purple, and Color Purple was on Broadway, so we read the book. It was great. And I would say to the students, I would say, when somebody makes a statement or has an opinion or has a strong feeling, feel free to oppose it, but I want you to let them know that you heard them. Make sure that you restate in some way, shape, or form what their opinion was before you oppose it. So this notion of listening closely, of signaling to somebody that you have heard them, and you understand what their point of view is before you challenge that point of view or before you add on to that point of view, is a signal that you are listening closely. And it takes a lot of energy and effort to listen closely. So those were my 10 principles, and at the end of it, I would always say, and win for Team Spelman. The win is not just for you. It's always for the institution. And wherever I was when I was at NYU, it was a win for NYU. Now, when I came to Spelman, it was win for Spelman. And I find that every now and then I would bring these principles back up, I circulate them again, or we go over them at least several times a year. It becomes a basis for how we treat each other, because if we're not treating each other well, we can't deliver service to someone else. So I'll just end by saying our service is our power. It is hard. It is daily. It takes a kind of saintliness. But it is the way that we affirm our students. It's the way we support our faculty. It's the way we support each other. It's the way we manifest who we are and what we believe in. And when you look at places like Morgan State, Spelman, Morehouse, Clark Atlanta, Hampton, Howard, all the HBCUs, nobody made it easy for us, ever. We can never take these institutions for granted. We have built these institutions. We have made them more and more excellent. And we have that power to do that. And it's awesome, it's magical, and it belongs to us. Thank you.
It was awesome.
Inspiring presentation. Service is always interesting in higher ed, and certainly we got a lot of information today as far as what is service. We've learned about barriers to service and how we can move forward. So what I would like to do now is open it up for some questions, and we have microphones in the aisles there, and so if you have any questions, please come forward.
Hello? Hello, how you doing?
Hi.
It was great hearing you.
Thank you.
I was really impressed, especially with you. My name is, by the way, sorry. My name is Roosevelt. I'm from the physical plant department, the maintenance department of the institution. And I take pride in the institution, and I really love the institution. I love working here. And I can't imagine being somewhere where you can't pay the rent, there's no heat, there's no air conditioning. I mean, that's really working a miracle. But I was taught there's no dumb question. So I don't know if this question I want to ask is appropriate or this is the right setting for it. But my concern, one of the things I think about often is substance abuse with how that affects, wherever you're at. It doesn't matter. I mean, everybody in here, I'm pretty sure, substance abuse have touched their lives one way or another. And now we're getting into an age now to where violence is touching us each and every day, one way or the other. And I was just wondering, what you had to say towards that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you surfaced both of those issues. I will say, at NYU, I unfortunately encountered a number of instances of substance abuse, and I found that it required a great deal of thought on my part to help people get help. Because, and I'm thinking now of three specific instances. One was a high-ranking administrator when I first came there. He left soon after. Another was a very distinguished faculty member. And a third was a faculty member who probably should have left a long time ago, but was still hanging around the school. But they all had some element of suffering from substance abuse, and it was having an impact on the school. Because in the case of faculty, they were in classrooms, right? It required me to really go, from that perspective, I was not a president at that time, I was a dean. I had to go to the office of the president and say, I need your help in helping me help these faculty members and administrators who are clearly having a problem. And I think the worst thing that we can possibly do is just kind of ignore it. Just say, well, that's their problem, or direct them to HR or whatever. But I really have, for each person, we had to think very carefully, what is the best approach to help these three individuals? So we took it from, I'm saying that to say, I approached it then from a very individual perspective. In terms of violence that you mentioned, when our students return to campus in the fall of 2021, we noticed a sharp rise in the number of student-to-student altercations. In that case, we moved very, very quickly to have our peer review panels review those cases, adjudicate them, and I will say, in most cases, those students, they were students in the residence hall, were sent home. And that was a very clear signal about our tolerance level. Now, they weren't expelled, they were suspended, they can always come back. But again, adjudicating this very directly, very quickly in terms of students is how we decided to manage that. Obviously I'm not there this semester to know what impact that has moving forward, but that's certainly the way that we approached it on our campus. Now, there's a third aspect to violence, which is very real for all of us who are in urban areas. In 2019, in August of 2019, 2 of my students were shot in front of Woodruff Library. One young lady in the heart. Not in her heart, I'm sorry, next to her heart. They both survived, they're both back in school, and that has taken a great deal of the care and attention to those students has required a lot of time from those of us who are in the administration, in student affairs, in counseling, to make sure that they are managing the trauma of that. And we had another student who, this was on national news, after George Floyd's murder. There were, as you know, uprisings in Atlanta, and a Morehouse student and a Spelman student were pulled out of their car and thrown to the ground by the police, right? And so here now we have an incident of law enforcement that has committed violence against our students, and I say all of that to say it is a real issue, and we as a community, we have to be prepared to cope with violence that may come between student to student, violence levied against students, law enforcement violence, we have had our neighborhood, unfortunately, at Atlanta University Center is one of the most, has one of the most highest crime rates in Atlanta. So there was violence in our neighborhood. And we have had to think very carefully about how we manage the emotions and the fear in our community that arises in the wake of that.
Thank you. Question.
Hello, my name is Dwayne Pate. I'm the Assistant Director of Field Education in the School of Social Work. My question is, well, I have 2 questions. Can you repeat the points 2 through 4 and the last 10 that you gave? And can you recommend or provide us with some of the some books that you're reading that are centered on administration and service?
So you said 2 to 4.
Yes.
Be kind.
Thank you.
Allow, encourage dissent and difference, and keep confidences. I'll be very honest with you, I read a lot of biographies. Anything from Nelson Mandela's biography to a presidential biography. Because what I find is that in those biographies, people are dealing with real problems and real sets of relationships. And I find those, I find it very gripping to see how specific leaders whom I admire have gone about solving problems. I told you the book Being Wrong. I think that is I really do think that that's an excellent book, and it does hit on aspects of service by Catherine Schultz. And Catherine Schultz is an amazing writer, so I strongly recommend that. I've read the Jim Collins books, the good to great, they're fine. Not my favorites, but you know, I've read them. But we actually have developed a bibliography, and maybe I can send that to Dr. Melinda to circulate. Yeah.
And also would be good perhaps if you could get a copy of some of your notes. Yeah, that would be great. Well, you had some great ideas, and we have a customer service. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Okay, Catherine, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. Okay, next question.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Schmidt Campbell, for the discussion that we're having now. I think it's so important that we understand the point of view from outside groups, as well as our Dr. Wilson. He is doing a phenomenal job. I've been here since 2000 as a student first. I've gone out to teach, and I've been invited back to work as an administrative person. So I really have a love for Morgan, and I want to see Morgan grow and become as great as it is and will become in the future. My question, let me find it in my notes, and this question is for both you and for Dr. Wilson. I'd like to hear your point of views. How do you stay positive in moving from virtual back to returning to face-to-face with the loss of personnel that were once here and now they've retired or no longer in that seat? Us as administrative staff, we're trying to learn a whole new navigation of who to go to, who those process majors are. A lot of things have changed, and in some processes, we're getting the training immediately, and you can't go to the same people that you did face-to-face that we did before the pandemic. How do you navigate that, staying positive, staying calm, staying emotional, and keeping your motivation up for things that need to be done on a day-to-day basis for staff, personnel, faculty? We're just having a hard time managing that. And I just want to, I don't want to hear that, oh, this is the Morgan way. I've never had that problem. And now I'm seeing a problem more so than returning back to campus than I ever had before. And I don't want to accumulate negative experiences in my love for Morgan. I wanted to keep going smoothly, finding the right people, knowing the right processes to go through. I don't want these stalemates to happen. Again, as you mentioned earlier, sitting on people's desks, they're not there, they're not answering the phone, they're staying in somebody's queue, and all it takes is a click, but it's not getting done. It's just stuck.
Thank you. That's a great set of not only questions but issues and challenges that we're faced when we having come back from sheltering in place. And I think the mistake that all of us, everybody, all over the country has made is that, oh, we're going to get back to normal. And we're not getting back to anything. We're reinventing the way we work. And that's the important thing for us to remember. In the fall of 2021, we experienced everything that you're saying is what we experienced. And one of the aspects of that is that we had been for 2 years isolated from each other, very often isolated from our own families or as parts of our family, isolated from our neighbors. I mean, and that even the ability to socialize almost had to be relearned, not only for us, but also for our students. One of the first things we noticed is that our, pre-COVID, you walked across Spelman's campus, everyone's hi. Now, everybody had to be masked, and people were kind of looked further. They were kind of getting to their and that kind of socializing and sociability seemed to have diminished. And this is purely accidental. I'm sure there are other ways of doing this. It so happened that Spelman put up tents outdoors to handle some beginning of school receptions and what have you. What we realized is that when you put the tents up, people could come and congregate and gather without wearing their masks because they were outside. And we did a series of social events. One was a big barbecue for all the staff. We did a party for new faculty. We did a celebration for faculty who had just been tenured. And what we found is that people kind of needed to reestablish how to talk to each other, socialize with each other, be with each other. And it sounds, now that I'm saying it out loud, it sounds kind of corny, but you could see the change that came over them when we began to do these with more regularity and getting people together more, because we had to go through a process of relearning and reinventing how we're going to work. And it's not done yet. So my caution is that we have to all give ourselves some patience. So that was one big issue. And the second issue is that we found that some people didn't, why are these people not coming to work? They advise students, they're supposed to be, why are they remote? And we found that many staff did not like the idea of being in an office inside with students because they felt that the risk of infection was high for them. So our interim provost had our facilities people put up a set of lovely outdoor chairs with umbrellas and said, you can have these for your office. So even reinventing how we work with each other was necessary. I had faculty meetings all the time on my front porch at Reynolds. Before COVID, I never did that. But I had this wonderful screened-in porch, and I would, put some, sweet tea, that's what they drink in Atlanta, sweet tea out, and invite people to and have snacks, and people would come, and we'd have great meetings on the porch. I would have, and that became a thing. Post-COVID. So we had to change the way we behaved to match the realities of what this pandemic had delivered on us. And it's a process. So we have to give ourselves some time to find out what are the new ways of doing things, what are the new ways of gathering, of meeting, of working collaboratively. We have to think about how we reinvent ourselves.
And so what I would add is it's amazing, Dr. Campbell, how much presidents think alike. And so almost every single point that you made, I had jotted it down. And I would just reiterate, number one, be patient. Number two, here at Morgan, midway through the pandemic, we realized that we were losing a lot of the esprit corps, a lot of really what it meant to be a connected community. And we established a re-socialization, re-acculturation group of about 55 people to begin to help us think through how we reunite the university when, as I phrased it, we get to the west side of COVID. And what you saw today was a part of that. Because this is the first time we've had a face-to-face faculty institute, a face-to-face staff institute since 2019. And so what you saw today was a deliberate attempt to make sure that those who are retiring and have retired from our faculty ranks and from our staff ranks, who really had that history, who really had that in their DNA at the institution, were there to pass on to the new arrivals what the institution is about, because they're new to the institution. So we want to make sure that we don't lose that cultural piece that has made this institution what it was. The second here was what I wrote down, was there's a reception at 5. There's a reason why we did this, and it's on every floor of Tyler. I want to see you at the reception. This is a way in which you can slowly work yourself back into a social space. You can have a glass of wine. I'm not going to say 2. But you can have a glass of water. You can have a glass of sweet tea, right? But this is a way in which both Dr. Campbell and I are saying that you have to kind of give yourself patience and then work your way into forming these relationships and reforming relationships. And then the last thing, which is why we are not carrying this via live stream, right? And we didn't do the Faculty Institute either. And it's not a coercion, but it's a way in which we're saying to the university community now, we got to really come at this reconnectedness with a high degree of intentionality. Because if we continue to kind of step back and we are so afraid to reconnect, then it's only going to exacerbate this as we go forward. And so my last point is I do think there's some merit in one of those old kind of management phrases that both of us were exposed to, which is like managing by walking around. So let me kind of rephrase that to say, get to know each other again by walking around, getting out of those offices, go downstairs, go to other buildings, go in those doors, find out who is there. If someone is new, you want to meet them, you want to know what they do. And basically, let's reconnect as well by staying off Zoom as much as we can and getting out and getting to know people. And I think you will be amazed that that will come quickly to you in terms of now who has joined, how do you solve those problems, how do you reconnect in a way in which you connected in the late 90s or in the early 2000s.
At Spelman, we have a wonderful cafeteria, dining hall. I'm always supposed to say dining hall, not cafeteria. Dining hall. And the dining hall had a section for staff and faculty to go. And during COVID, we closed that down because it didn't have a lot of ventilation in it. And that was a loss. Because at least at lunchtime, everybody could go and kind of, in Atlanta we had fried chicken Wednesday. Do you ever hear? They went fried chicken Wednesday, and you'd go and it'd be packed. You want to see somebody, show up on Wednesday at the dining hall. So but that's part of the fabric of the social fabric. And as those things disappear, we forget how important they were. Just in terms of trading information, touching base with people. And so finding new ways to do that is going to be really important in the coming months and years.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay, we have 2 more questions. Just wanted to let you know that we asked the shuttle bus to come a little bit later, so you're not going to miss the shuttle if you're going to be taking the shuttle back. So they will wait for us. Okay, Dr. Jeremiah, you have a question.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Campbell, for your insightful address to the faculty. When I come to these sessions, I try to fit the message within dimensions of disciplines. Sociology, cognition and psychology, linguistics. As a linguist by training, I'm wondering how much of those 3 C words, I think you mentioned courage, that you wrote.
Civility, courteousness, and conscientiousness. Right. Yeah.
How much of those words are driven by the Southern culture? Because notice too, you mentioned sweet tea. So I just thought I'd see how much of those choice of words, they were governed by the larger cultural framework in which these things appear.
Yeah, that's a great observation because, I'm a New Yorker, right? And so when I go up and order my coffee, I'm like, say, coffee, and in Atlanta, it's good morning. How are you? And I had to really kind of readjust my sense of, being sociable. But part of it is, yes, there is definitely a warm hospitality in the South and a way of, greeting people and spending time to, exchange greetings and how are you and how are you doing and how's your family. That sometimes can get passed over in, big cities like New York, where people are moving fast and they feel as though they don't have time for that. But I still think that even with the Southern hospitality, there is all of us who serve some stakeholders or constituency in a college or university have, particularly in the past 2 years, been met with an unusual barrage of intense feelings and emotions. I think that's a reality of what we have encountered as service providers. And so I think that we have to be more conscious about how we retain that warmth and hospitality and patience and civility and courteousness, but we also have to be diligent as institutions to make sure we're not tripping our own workforce up with what we have not done to make it easy for them. I think both of those hold true, the individual responsibility and the institutional.
Thank you. Okay, last question.
Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Ransom. I am the manager of the purchasing card department on the procurement. And the purchasing card department handles all credit cards for Morgan State University as well as the state of Maryland. So it's quite a task, but with that said, I just wanted to say that I am truly a Morgan proud individual. I have recruited 9 family members, all have received degrees. We have 2 enrolled in school right now, so I go over and beyond the call of duty for Morgan State. Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Thank you so much for your welcome today. Your insight as well as in relation to service was very, very knowledgeable. It was something that I have a lot of takeaways. And one thing for me right now is I am a full-time employee and I am a full-time graduate student. Wow. So I'm non-traditional. And so I deal with a lot of different things as far as service, my expectations of service. What are some of the things that you could tell me in relation to service as a student and as an employee? Thank you.
Wow. First of all, let me tell you how much I admire you for, first of all, having the 9 members of your family go through Morgan State, and for your taking on that responsibility of being a student and also being a full-time employee. When I was a graduate student, I gave birth to my 2nd child, and so that was I get the kind of dual life you have to live when you take on the role of student and something else. I think what's important, for those who find themselves in those dual roles, you are in a very special position because you're experiencing, you're the stakeholder, you're the constituent, you're the person who the university serves, right, as the student. So you get to see what's working well, what's not working, and bring that insight into then wearing your other hat as not only as an employee, but someone who's in a leadership position, right? And who can then understand what may need to change or be altered or edited or revised in order to make that service that you experienced as a student better. So I think it's a really wonderful role. I had one of the members of my leadership team was a parent for 4 years. She had a daughter who was in school, and so I got to see and she was part of the admissions office. So she got to see exactly how her daughter experienced what the admissions department was doing or not doing, right? And so that's an invaluable perspective that you bring to work every day.
Okay, thank you. Well, we certainly got a lot of information this afternoon. So many wonderful takeaways. Thank you so much. So let's have another round of applause. Thank you very much.
I really think we can just keep that applause going here. First of all, we're going to really come back to that. Many of you may have read that Angelina Jolie's daughter, of course, is Anna Spelman. And the videos have been flying everywhere where Angelina Jolie took her to Spelman last week, I believe. And of course is trying to learn the electric slide. But just in terms of the joy on this young woman's face was just amazing. So it's quite apparent that Spelman has very, very special traditions and they're being carried forward. I think we have found the individual who should come to Morgan and lead the Morgan Executive Leadership Institute. What do you think? So, Dr. Campbell, you have a house in Montana, beautiful Montana. You have a house in beautiful New York. Now, what better place to have a third one than in lovely Baltimore, right? Officially now, please join me. Let's do it right. Let's do it Morgan right. Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell, thank you very much.